Chapter 12. Inside the private room, Shiluo's chest was heaving. Yusui stared at Shiluo with complex look in his eyes. He slowly put down the wine glass. Don't you think this feels like deja vu? Shiluo's eyes were red, and his voice was unsteady. In those days, when you found out why I gave you breakfast money, were you stung by your conscience? The night before you sold me to NSN, when you saw that I had finally opened up to you, did you hesitate a little? After killing evil 34 times, when you finally found out that it was my new ID, you must have regretted it for a second or two, right? Shiluo tried his best to make himself sound light and casual. He tried his best to suppress the sobs that were threatening to escape from his throat. I didn't guess wrong, did I? But, back then, weren't you pretty good at pretending? After Shiluo joined the FS team, he brought up the old matter about the breakfast money. Yusui didn't reveal even the tiniest bit of shame, but from that day on, he never let Shiluo go hungry in the morning. What's going to happen now? Shiluo grabbed onto Yusui's wrists. His eyes full of hatred. Can't we treat this as if you never came back? Can't you pretend that you thought all the other 9 glasses were full of alcohol? Obviously nobody else has found out. No one saw through it. Just pretend you don't know, like you never came back to verify. Is that so hard to do? Yu Shen, Shiluo hated how he couldn't just swallow whole the person in front of him. Everyone's already an adult. Hasn't anyone told you? Discretion is the better part of valor. Then I won't need to be embarrassed, and you won't need to be condemned by your conscience. Yusui looked at Shiluo for a long time and holding back his emotions, said, Shiluo, this is different from what you told me before I left. What's the matter if it is? So what if I lied? Shiluo's voice trembled. After all, did you keep your word? In the end, didn't you lie too? I'm curious how you can say such words. Someone like you actually has the nerve to blame others for not keeping their word. Yusui took a deep breath and after a moment he had calmed down. He took back his hands that Shiluo held. Today's bet doesn't count. Shiluo's eyes suddenly widened. About your transfer. I'll talk to your club about it and go through the normal process. Yusui looked at Shiluo. Even if the bet today was real, I won't let you come to my team without any contract fee. Shiluo was so angry he laughed. Do you think IAC will let me go? Do you think you can talk them down? Yusui has resumed his calm state and said, then that's for me to worry about. The punch that had been brewing for so many days finally hit cotton. For a moment, Shiluo didn't know what else to say. Shiluo tried his best to hold back the tears so as not to make himself look even more pathetic. After a long time of saying nothing, he said, I'll consider the last time I'm played by you. You should treat it as if I had never even been here today. Shiluo put on up his baseball cap and pulled the brim down low. He picked up his mobile phone from the table then turned around and left. By the time he had returned to the IAC base, dawn was breaking over the horizon. Shiluo did not return directly to the base and turned instead to a breakfast place nearby that opened early. Shiluo sat at the innermost seat by the window and ordered himself a bowl of wontons. The steam from the wontons rose up, warming Shiluo's reddened eyes. Actually, Shiluo had long let go of that trivial matter about the breakfast money. At the time, Yusui hadn't intended anything malicious and he'd only happened upon it by accident. He hadn't meant anything by it but unfortunately brushed against Shiluo's sore spot. It was just a coincidence. What's more, after that, Yusui also stood in for him to put forth his resentment regarding breakfast. It was back then, when it hadn't even been a week since Shiluo joined the FS team. At that time, Shiluo's father, Kei Chunji, was still unwilling to give up. Seeing that Shiluo had followed Yusui's advice and moved from that seedy internet cafe into the FS base to become a professional player, he felt moved and felt that he could take it a step further and convince Shiluo to go back to school. Of course, it was much better to be a professional player than to do live broadcasts on some questionable platform, but it wasn't enough. Kei Chunji always thought that being a professional player was not the proper way. Not to mention that when the rebellious Shiluo was compared with the outstanding Kei Hao, Kei Chunji had no way to lift his head in front of Shiluo's grandfather. The Kei family had 2 grandchildren. Compared with Kei Hao, who had entered the gates of a prestigious school, his son appeared to be too inferior to show in public. So it hadn't even been a few days since Shi Luo moved to the FS dorms when K Chunji wheedled the FS base's address from K Hao and came visiting. This prim and proper father came, and Yu Sui had no reason not to let him in. Moreover, he himself was uncertain. He thought it wouldn't a bad idea if Shi Luo agreed to go back to school. So without so many words, he asked K Chunji to come in. However, Yu Sui didn't bring him to Shi Luo's dorm and only asked him into the training room. Yu Sui sat back on his seat and put on headphones to play the game, signaling to the both of them to do as they wished. In the empty training room, Yu Sui trained as usual. There was a dark undercurrent between father and son, and the atmosphere quickly turned strange. 17-year-old Shi Luo stared furiously at Yu Sui's back. He eyed K Chunji warily, without saying a word. With outsiders around, K Chunji was also very restrained. He looked around the training room and frowned slightly. It was before noon, the other team members were still asleep, and the aunt, who cleaned the base, hadn't had time yet to clean up. The training room was a mess. Except for Yu Sui's desk, which was a bit more orderly, the others had various wires from peripheral devices all tangled up together. There were all sorts of action figures around. On the middle of the training room floor, someone's jigsaw puzzle was spread out. The couch cushions were strewn on the ground. The takeaway boxes were still on the table in front of the sofa, as well as a few unfinished cups of milk tea. K Chunji unobtrusively pinched his nose. He had just barely sat down on the sofa when he stood up instantly. On the sofa were someone's keycaps. K Chunji didn't want to sit anymore. Shi Luo's eyes flashed with a sneer. He picked up the keycaps and sat on the sofa. He propped his legs on the coffee table, looking down at the keycaps in his hand. K Chunji sighed. Luo, I heard all that your cousin had to say. This place is good, but they don't have a vacancy for you. You could go to school first and maintain a good relationship with the people here. Considering their relationship with your cousin, they wouldn't just cut you off. Shi Luo raised his eyes and looked at K Chunji like he was a seeking idiot, smirking and not saying anything. K Chunji had no idea what was wrong with what he'd said, and he didn't feel that what he was proposing was at odds with anything here. He continued to persuade him. The college entrance examination is happening soon. You have such good grades. Don't you think it would be a pity not to take the exam? Shi Luo held the keycap and asked, what would be a pity? It would be a waste of all your good grades. K Chunji was filled with anger. You've studied for 10 long years and this is how you end up. Don't you think it's a waste? No. Shi Luo stared at K Chunji calmly and said, I got good grades not because I worked hard but just because I was smart. It wasn't any hardship to study, so how can this be a waste? K Chunji was angry to the point of almost suffocating. Shi Luo tossed the keycap in his hand, and the corners of his mouth hooked up slightly. This is the truth, I don't feel distressed at all. K Chunji suppressed his ire. Then do you feel like you've achieved something glorious here? Not glorious, but nothing shameful either. Shi Luo's eyes were black and bright, staring at K Chunji. Is someone feeling ashamed? Maybe this someone can't justify it to grandfather. K Chunji was jabbed at his core and was speechless for a moment. There was a flash of pleasure in Shi Luo's eyes, and when he stopped, he didn't want to continue what he had to say. He set down his feet and squatted on the sofa to whistle quietly. I see. K Chunji no longer tried to deceive him with flowery words. You're purely out for revenge, right? Shi Luo, you're using your future to anger your father. Are you stupid? Won't you be the one who'll regret it? Am I the one you're angering? You're only interfering with yourself. Shi Luo's lips moved but said nothing. Childish. Ridiculous. K Chunji snapped. When you're an adult and have really matured, you'll know how irresponsible your behavior is now. Not to me. It is irresponsible to yourself. Shi Luo exhaled. Don't make me say everything. It won't be very nice. Shi Luo narrowed his eyes slightly. You know best just who exactly I harm by dropping out of school. Dad, there are some things that would be better left unsaid. I also don't want to insult Grandpa, so I think we're almost done here. K Chunji was unable to utter a word from extreme anger. Shi Luo sneered and stopped talking. K Chunji looked at Shi Luo with dread. He took a few steps in place, took a deep breath, and slowed his tone. I understand, you still hate me, don't you? Dad was too busy to take good care of you these years. But look at K. How did your uncle and aunt take good care of him? You're much better off than he was. He was sent to study abroad by himself when he wasn't yet an adult. All these years, he's been taking care of himself. Kei Chunji whispered softly, but look at your cousin, did he blame your uncle and aunt? The first money he made, he didn't spend a penny on himself. He used all of it to buy gifts for your aunt and uncle. Why don't you take a page from his book? Shiluo laughed. Shiluo said grimly, I'm really sorry, I bought breakfast with the first money I made. I have to feed myself before I buy gifts for you. Kei Chunji's face was extremely taut. He subconsciously glanced at Yusui and whispered, just when will you stop turning over old accounts? Never. Shiluo said faintly, sorry, I just like to turn over old accounts. It's not me who's embarrassed, so why can't I? Okay. Kei Chunji tried his best to make his voice softer. Dad knows that he was wrong. Dad promises that he will never limit any of your spending in the future, okay? I will double your living expenses so that you can have money at any time, alright? Kei Chunji took out his mobile phone and glanced at it. 2,000, doubled to 4,000. I'll add another 1,000, 5,000, is that enough? Kei Chunji couldn't bear to look at the overnight takeaway boxes on the table and whispered. You don't want to eat all the good food the housekeeper makes at home and instead you want to live this kind of life. And even if you play games here, just how much can they pay you? Shi Luo paused. He had joined in a hurry and Yusui hadn't talked to him about this yet. He really doesn't know how much it will be. When Kei Chunji saw Shi Luo had stopped talking, he said, don't you understand? You're not willing for Dad to provide for you, so you insist on coming here to eat takeaway for all your meals, drink this kind beverage made from who knows what, and waste away your potential by making this little bit of money during your best years. With a click, on the other side of the training room, Yusui took off his headset. Father and son instinctively turned to look. I'm sorry, uncle. Yusui smiled. I didn't mean to disturb you and your son. I just heard that you've been curiously asking so I thought I'd answer. The Fog branch of our FS club is quite heartless and faithless. It has never been our custom to provide our players with mental reassurance, so we only have one team and no secondary team, and definitely no substitutes. Shiluo Xuanshou coming here was unexpected. Right now, he is nominally my substitute and the very first substitute player we've had in years. So, we had nothing to base his annual salary on, which caused a delay in resolving this issue. But we've arranged something now. Since he's just a substitute, a tenth of my annual salary should be enough. Right now, we don't have his manager's contract, so advertising fees, live signing fees and such are still to be determined. I can only tell you the basic contract fee. Yusui smiled. It should be 3.5 million, equivalent to a bit less than 300,000 monthly salary. When Kei Chunji, this outsider to matters regarding esports, heard this figure, his face gradually turned green. Shi Luo resisted and coughed twice. Yusui picked up his headset. By the way, the takeaway on the table is specially delivered by a private food store we often go to, not the kind that can be ordered with a mobile app. The ingredients are definitely not as good as yours, but they are all flown in on the same day from Japan. Please rest assured that we won't treat Shi Luo badly. Yusui looked at Shi Luo. Also, those limited edition keycaps are puppies. They're more than 4,000 each. You can play with them but don't lose them. Yusui put on his headphones and continued playing games. Shi Luo, holding the 5-figure keycaps in his hand, looked up at Kei Chunji. How much were you saying my monthly allowance would be?